accompanied by a fully illustrated exhibition catalog. The artist has exhibited extensively at other major institutions worldwide, including Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, Bentonville, Arkansas, 2018, Kunsthalle Liegen, Germany, 2014, University of Louisville, Kentucky, 2013, Kentucky Museum of Art and Craft, Louisville, 2013, Sculpture Center, New York, 2012, Art Space, San Antonio, 2010, Astrup Fearnley Museum of Modern Art, Oslo, 2018, Ross Kunst Museum, Arts, sorry for my pronunciation, Arcus, Denmark, Parasol Unit Foundation for Contemporary Art, London, 2016, Serpentine Gallery, London, 2005, and Center for Curatorial Studies, Bard College, Annandale-on-Hudson, New York, 2005. Ronay participated in the 2013 Lion Biennial created by Gunnar Cabran and the 2004 Whitney Biennial. He lives and works in New York. So without further ado, Matthew, welcome.
Hey, thanks for you guys for inviting me. I always feel like it's an honor to be asked to do this out of all the other people. I don't always really enjoy to talk directly about my work. So what I enjoy is to share with you other people's work that somehow I'm projecting my own work onto that somehow. So I have 1,000 billion images, so I'm going to go pretty quickly. If you have a question about any images, you can just stop me and ask me to stop on that image or whatever. But before I begin, I will show a couple of images of my work just so that you can understand, if you've never seen it before, like what I do. Currently, I make sculptures out of basswood, and very often I enjoy to organize them so that they create connections together. I work by myself in the studio. I don't employ anyone or do anything. I have a very small operation in Queens. And these are some of the sculptures that I make. I often try to weave connections between them. They do relate to biomorphic abstraction and nature and science and stuff like that. So these are what my works look like, and they're all about like this big for the most part. Sometimes I work in much larger, but very often I don't. So anyway, these are what the sculptures look like, and I'm going to talk about a couple of different subjects and kind of weave into those subjects how they relate to the way that I work. So for me, everything I do starts with drawing, and often the person that's making those drawings, me, is not in communication with the person that makes those, who's also me. And so I often have thought about this because I also really love architecture, and for many years made money making models for architects, as this relationship between an architect and a builder, and that the architect is obviously the one that makes the plan and knows how to build things most likely, but hands off the duty to a builder who worries about how to engineer it and how to make it all happen. And so one of the, it's not quite architecture, but a movement that I found really interesting in relationship to this is the Vienna Werkstatt. And so this is a period of design that happens in Vienna that was started by these two goofballs in about the turn of the century. And what it does is it linked the artists, the designers, like these two guys were designers, Joseph Hoffman and Koloman Moser, and it linked them at the time with a group of craftspeople that had been kind of embarrassed by industrialization. So people who had traditionally spent their lives in metalsmithing or glass blowing or whatever had kind of been replaced by machines. And at the same time, tastes are changing, and a new grand bourgeoisie wants a new way to kind of express themselves. And so in Vienna at this time, you get this kind of utopia that creates architecture, everything from ironwork, furniture, interiors, which include stained glass, carpeting, chairs, flatware, glassware, metalware, things like vases. This is a basket that holds flowers. So they're creating all these different things, ceramics. And basically it's almost a utopia where the grand bourgeoisie, who are mostly Jews in Vienna, could hire this kind of atelier to create their most wild idea about what the new version of object making for the home or for architecture could be. And then these great artisans who had been kind of embarrassed by the Industrial Revolution could be valued again and put their expertise into making these things. And so you have people that know how to work with fabric and brass, pattern making, textiles, fashion, jewelry, you name it. It's kind of a whole utopian world. And so for me, I feel like the way that I relate this to my own work is that, like I said, like I'm a person who draws constantly, who tries to imagine all these things, and then there's another person inside of me whose job it is and whose pleasure it is to try to make the objects. So these are some of the far out concoctions that they had come up with. So it also included some artists you may be familiar with, like here on the left is Klimt, who was a part of the Vienna Secession, which happened before the Werkstatt, and then the Werkstatt became after that. Also, going this direction. So this is like Klimt actually was part of the Werkstatt and designed these murals in this room. And this is like some Coleman Mosier chairs with the Klimt between it, and also Egon Schiele, who also was part of this movement as well. You have to also think about at Vienna in this time, you also have like the advent of psychology as we know it, and also some incredible musical insanity that far outstripped art and its avant-garde. So a lot's going on in Vienna. It's kind of, I think of it as a utopia. But I wanted to feature within all that kind of strict designy stuff that I just showed you, I wanted to show you this one man who was a part of the Werkstatt named Dagobert Pichler. And so it's this guy, he looks a little depressed. Whenever I include the image of the artist, it's always just because they wanted it included in their catalog or a curator included it. I'm not, oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, all these images I've collected from my book collection. These are not things that I don't include images from the internet in my lectures, because the way that I experience art as a kind of recluse is to buy books and to study things through books. So these are all images from my books. So Dagobert Pichler was like a very like kind of ebullient, joyful, and offbeat kind of decorative genius. And a lot of these things that he made, I can't even imagine like the drawings that he gave to the craftsmen, because some of these things are so ridiculous. Like, how do you make a drawing of what this table is supposed to look like? Like, it's totally insane. And so I found like even in the core of his sensibility, like this is a letter that he wrote. Like, so every molecule of his body had this like eccentric kind of sensibility that has a little bit of Aubrey Beardsley in it, but also this just really offbeat way in which he used his sensibility to create these odd furniture and interior constructions. Like, this is a display cabinet. It's got these like weird wooden tassels on the feet. It opens up to display all these crazy things. He did fabulous metalwork and ceramics, as well as like very fanciful metalwork. I don't even know what these things are, including one of my favorite things he made is this leather thing that I'm going to get to. But he even works with people to sew these crazy laces. And so you can kind of see that like the thing that I love about the Werkstatt is like whatever the hell they imagined they wanted to do, like they're like, oh, I love this like drawing of Medusa. So let's have our lace makers make it for this crazy doily that goes over this table. Like, and I guess it's ugly in one way because it's very luxurious and bourgeois, but at the same time, it's very utopic. This is the leather jewelry box that he made that I think is just absolutely fantastic and eccentric. So next in my kind of meandering rambling is I wanted to also share somebody that is only a drafts person that never actually makes the thing that they're fantasizing about. And so there's a lot of fantasy architects out there. Hermann Fensterlin was a German who was chastised by the Nazis, and his studio was blown up during the war, and so nothing that he really made survived, and he never actually built or was able to realize any of his buildings. This is him. But he created these fantasy drawings of these kind of blobby, organic imagination fantasy buildings. And so he did make a couple of small models, but this is like pre-CAD drawing, kind of like, I know there's a lot of architecture now that tries to look like this, but this is like 1920, 1930, very like bio-hacked, AI, I don't know, like underwater strange buildings that you could possibly never live in that look like fat rolls or jellyfish or something like this. And so you have to also admire just drawing's use, and that like it doesn't take that much risk for someone to put their most wild fantasies into what architecture can be. And so for me, because everything I do starts with drawing, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the use of drawing and different ways that people use drawing, and different ways that that people also conjure things by doing repetitive mark making. So for me, I draw in these little sketchbooks or whatever, they're about like this big. I draw all the time without really any goal. Although they sometimes look like sculptures, I don't really think of them as being sculptures. I just draw. I'm never quite thinking how, or thinking, should they be made? Are they going to be made? How would they be made? I just draw all the time. I think it's through this kind of process that you can free yourself from the judgment of what you make that's good or that's bad. There's really zero risk in drawing. And so I draw like this all the time. I don't necessarily find this kind of drawing meditating, but I will say that there are certain ways in which the body itself creates the sensibility of the way that you draw or the marks that you make. And so these drawings become, like you'll see at the bottom here, this drawing becomes this sculpture. And so for me, I've been very loyal to the drawing, because the drawing is doing things that you may never think or be able to do in sculpture. So I just wanted to share a little bit of my drawings and then expose you to some drawings that other people have made that I consider to be using the process that I call meditative conjuring. And so by that, I mean that the process of drawing is a kind of now moment, and that you're not thinking, what am I drawing? You're almost like when you use a Ouija board and you let your hands move the pilot, like your hand is just moving, otherwise known as automatic drawing. So a lot of these people didn't think of what they did as automatic drawing, but to me, there's a kind of freedom here that I find could be meditative state. So I wanted to start with the drawings made by the Shakers. The Shakers are an extinct religious sect that kind of populated a little bit of New England and all the way as far down as Kentucky, where I'm from. And I visited some of the Shaker villages. They had extremely strict and bizarre dogmas, like they had separation of sex, they did not reproduce. But they, like the Vienna Werkstatt, they created a whole world that included design, architecture, music, poetry, drawing, etc. And a very aesthetic kind of existence, quiet, solitary. And they have a kind of particularly American relationship to work, and that they call it, well, this is like pre-hyper-capitalism, they call it work as prayer, which is something that I really believe in. And so this is kind of the cultural residue of what they made, the furniture they made, and the things that the way that their architecture looked. But they produced these crazy drawings that were normally made by teenage girls, and they were not displayed on walls. They were usually rolled up and put in drawers. And these were, according to them, messages that they received from God. that sometimes reference dance patterns. I find sometimes they relate to science or they relate to other things, although I'm always interested to relate everything to science. So these, if you've ever seen one of these in person, like it looks like someone made them with like a microscope. Like they're only about this big, and the craftsmanship is absolutely incredible. And they include this, probably you can't see with the projector, but up close, it's almost like a secret language, and that it's describing often real life things. Like this drawing here describes a walk that someone was taking between the properties where they heard the voice of God or something like this. And so all these drawings have this like quality of precision and time making, mark making, obsessive pattern making, a kind of like you can see the joy and the way that they accomplish the feat of all these. Like this is supposed to be a burning tree. So like each tree has these like beautifully wavy lines that are coming off of it. Sometimes they describe, you know, like the people that are involved, sometimes they're practical, but even in their practicality, the mark making is obsessive and kind of part of this thing that I'm calling meditative conjuring. I also wanted to touch on the kilims of Turkey. These were also made by women, and often the imagery of the kilim is directly linked to the technique, so that like as for us as Western artists, like we're taught technique and then we learn how to express ourselves, whereas this particular kind of craft, the technique actually creates the design. And I find this, the design's function as a mnemonic device. So they're reminding people about their mythology, or they're reminding people about the changing of seasons, or these kinds of things. And so each carpet has this kind of meditative quality to me of the hand making all these knots and doing all these things. And that like all this meditative work, it has this kind of vibrating quality that's pulling you into some sort of like cosmic portal, or like a ketamine trip or something. I don't know. It's like everything is like vibrating and kind of holding you in this space. I don't know if any of you guys saw this show that was at the Drawing Center, but this Guo Fanji is this Chinese woman who started making drawings at the age of 47. She was a Qigong practitioner. And she used drawing, as she describes, as a technique to know things. So there's this way in which she makes these scratchy drawings that, like, for example, this is the map or a drawing of an ear. But the way that she's made these like kind of repetitive, almost musical strokes that are like defining something that she knows through her Qigong, about, you know, different parts of the body and the way they function and vibrate within the world. But in order to know these things, she has to use drawing to figure it out. So this is a drawing of a liver meridian. Some of them are like, let's see, there are a couple that are like where she uses drawing to envision places that she's never been. But again, there's this repetitive quality of the mark making, and how you feel that the mark making is transporting the person who's making it into the world in which they imagine, or that they would like to imagine. This is a really great book that the Drawing Center made, if you're curious. It's a fantastic book with great essays. But I find this work really quite fascinating. I didn't get to see the show myself because I don't go out that often, but I have seen one in person, and they're really gorgeous, gigantic scrolls. At the time, she was kind of shunned by the contemporary art world in China because of the kind of witchiness that they tried to attach to her technique. But I find it no different and much more exciting than much contemporary art. Minnie Evans, I guess some people would say she's an outsider artist. It's not something, a term that I use, but she had this amazing thing that I can't stop obsessing on, which is she kept her very first and second drawings. She manned a security gate at this big garden, and she would often just doodle at the gate while she sat there. And she made these incredible drawings that she describes as being connected to, you know, ancient cultures that were destroyed by the flood. So I'm assuming that's like Old Testament shit. But for me, like, there's a way in which like it's incredible to me that the very first drawing that a person makes has this quality of mark making and this way in which they see space, or they actually capture this incredible feeling that for me feels extremely familiar. I think for someone to have this be their first drawing, or this is her second drawing, to have the sensibility be so completely formed from the very beginning, it just blows me away. I don't know if MoMA has up now, but they often have up a couple of Minnie Evans pieces in their little outsidery gallery that they have, which also has some other great stuff. She unfortunately doesn't have as many great books as somebody like Martin Ramirez, but the works that they do publish, I find that the symmetry and the overall kind of joy and experimentation to be extremely fascinating and more sophisticated than a lot of people that are celebrated. This is a really great Louise Bourgeois book. I know everyone knows Louise Bourgeois, but this book that she made, I really recommend to anyone who's interested in drawing, because it's a book in which she shows these drawings, but then she connects her kind of personal voice into what the drawings are about. And I think for me, the thing that I really relate to for myself as a meditator is that she talks a lot about the feeling of making marks. And I'm not going to read this quote. Sometimes I do, but I'm not in the mood right now. So, but basically what she's saying in this quote is that, like, she wasn't really aware of how important meditation was to her when she made a lot of these drawings, but that as she grew older, she realized that, like, with her anxiety and insomnia, that what happens when you make marks like this is that you find that you can calm yourself, that you can slow your heartbeat down, that you can envision places that you wish you were that were calming, and so forth. And then also, as a bald person, I'm obsessed with the hair-like quality of these works. One of the things that I find is in common with all kind of meditative mark makers is this desire to do all these dots and lines, which brings me to Agnes Martin, somebody else that people know a lot about. If you read about her biography, she is a super interesting person that kind of shunned New York to go live in a kind of electricity-less building in the middle of nowhere. And she's known for making these kind of grid paintings, or these line paintings that up close look like this, where you can feel the brush going back and forth. But the part of her practice that I really geek out on are these drawings that she made. And that in the drawings, you get this feeling that she really loves the pleasure of the pen or pencil dragging across the piece of paper. Like when I look at the drawings, like I hear or feel the pen, like starting here, ending here, like the way that the ink flows out from the paper, from the pen onto the paper. And I find this very spiritual to me. She also has a really great book on writings her own writings that I recommend, which are pretty fascinating. I wanted to talk about this guy, Nicholas Pope, as well. He's an Australian artist who was kind of, this is him, his wife. He was kind of in the mode of like 70s macho public art kind of guy. And he got a grant from the Australian government to go to Tanzania and caught an encephalitic virus in his brain. And it mixed with the Parkinson's. And so he became not as able-bodied as he was and had to redefine his practice, which I find heartbreaking, but also so inspiring that he was able to reconnect with his art making. And so when he lost control of his body, the physical therapists recommend that he use mark making while he listened to his favorite music. And so he was really into doo-wop, and I don't know if probably no one listens to doo-wop anymore, but it has like that, and it has this like kind of like epileptic kind of like feeling that he enjoyed, but also was conducive to the way that he was able to make marks. And so as he progressed, he regained some of his physicality, but his style in his drawings at least remained really, really scratchy. And I find them absolutely gorgeous and beautiful, and that they reflect the kind of biomorphic quality of nature that we may intuitively understand, at least for me also in my work. I feel like these are shapes and things that I intuitively draw and understand, that maybe a lot of people intuitively draw and understand, people that I'm not including like as well. There's so many artists that respond to this kind of abstraction, and you don't need to necessarily define whether it's tumor or baby or whether it's mitosis or what it is, but that you relate to the nature, that it's kind of recalling of nature. So these are just his drawings. He ended up making sculptures, but he directs people to make sculptures based on these drawings and stuff. And so I just thought I thought his story was really amazing, and I find the drawings incredibly inspiring. So to relate it back to my own work, as I'm a meditator, and when I started my meditation practice, I was having these visions, not visions, but I was using a kind of a shape that I had imagined to help guide my breath. And the whole time I've been working, I always was, like I had done some experimentation with psychedelics, like most people. And I think like I had always pursued to find the imagery that was, I would say, like far out or outside of me, or at this area that I was hoping to arrive at. And whenever I did psychedelics, I never actually had hallucinations. And in fact, one of the things that I learned from doing hallucinogens was that the imagery was inside me. And I never really quite experienced it, because as I've explained to you, when I draw automatically, I don't have an image in my mind. I just draw the way that my hands and muscles make me draw. I don't feel like I'm the author, but when I started meditating, I did have a vision of this breathing technique. And so to understand, I'll show you, there are a couple of them, but like the inhale starts here, and as it gets all the way to the top, then it begins an exhale. And so I use this technique to try to focus on my meditations. And so I started to work them into my daily practice, so that I would meditate, ride my bike to the studio, and then make a gouache every day that kind of followed the path of the way that this breathing technique was like changing the shape. And so I'm sharing with you my stuff just so that you can see why I choose the artworks of these other people that are things that I admire, show you how they relate to my practice. So just in terms of scale, these are incredibly tiny. And so I'm using these like really weird jeweler's glasses to like make dots within dots, or lines within lines, or any of these kinds of things. So that's my relationship to meditative conjuring. So for this, nearly the last part of this lecture, I wanted to share with you kind of some blurbs. I don't really know what to call them, but like I've been thinking about, all the books that I've been reading and collecting over the pandemic, and I kind of was trying to figure out like a thread or a way to talk about these artists that I've been thinking about. And most of them are dead, like most people in this lecture, but I started to think about this concept that I learned about from reading an essay in this book. And I really recommend this book to anyone. It's about abstraction and spirituality. It was an exhibition that was made at LACMA in Los Angeles by Maurice Tauchman. It includes the work of the normal abstractionists that we think about in relationship to spirituality, like Kandinsky or Paul Klee, but it also includes people like Hilma af Klint. It was the first time that they showed this work was in 1985 at LACMA. And so the book is incredible, and it has an essay in it by Donald Cuspit, who's an old time dude that, critic. And so I'm not a big reading of theory and critic guy, but I wanted to read Donald Cuspit because he was the first person that I had read that kind of talked about the possibility that minimalism had a spiritual quotient. I always kind of blew off minimalism as just being oddly intellectual and conservative, but I read this essay by him, and basically what he says in the essay is that for most artists, the endeavor of creation has a spiritual quotient. And so when artists were truly interested in representing abstraction, their relationship to it was spiritual. And so it was not very popular or materially economically viable for them. Like let's say when Kandinsky first starts doing his abstractions. And so they were kind of protected by the monetization and commercialization of their spiritual endeavor. And so as the avant-garde becomes more mainstream, the paintings by Kandinsky and other artists become more expensive, and it ends up destroying, or theoretically destroying, the kind of spiritual quotient of making this work. And so Donald Cuspit's kind of theory in this great essay that I recommend in this book is that the second crop of artists that work with abstraction work from a position of silence. And so, like, I'm talking about somebody like maybe James Turrell or somebody like this, where the work itself doesn't connote place or thing or anything. It's almost like a no place or a no sound, or it has this quantity of asceticism where things are being removed. And so I kind of decided as an exercise to divide these like 8 artists, or kind of fade them from like quietness and minimalism to a kind of euphoric and disorganized transcendence. So it's like the beginning of these set of artists will be kind of like minimal and quiet, and they'll move louder and louder and more complicated and more disorganized. And then also at the same time, that fade also corresponds to a shift from abstraction to figuration. So this guy, Robert Grosvenor, he still makes work now. He shows with Karma sometimes. But back in the day, in the 70s, he had like a waterfront Williamsburg studio. And he worked with this material in this way that I relate to kind of, I relate a lot of this to like this tomb-like quality, and that like a lot of minimal works are about this thing that I was saying, like a no place. And so it's like he makes a stack of railroad ties that feel like a mausoleum, or you see this tube and you feel like it's a tube that drains all life out, like it's a black hole. Like they have this like antimatter quality. It's like he's just showing a plank of wood, but you feel like somehow this plank of wood includes all this like dead material, that it's a repository or a monument to this like no place. And I find this work kind of goth, and I really like Grosvenor. His new work is not like this, but this older work that I want to show here has this quality where they have tiny little details, like this tiny little curve at the top of these planks, or like, I think like he has a piece where he just drug one of these big like railroad ties around just to get the ends to taper. And he kind of becomes obsessed with this kind of primordial shelter, temple-like place, a grave, something like this. But the materials are cheap and have to do with building and have to do with shelter and have this like quality. To me, it's like kind of an emotional quality of death. And then as time progresses, I start to then see them as kind of like landing scapes for some sort of extraterrestrial like non-being, like maybe an AI or something. And this one looks like Bacon. He also has this move he makes that I wanted to include where he first got known for this like really intense minimalism, which for some people is interesting. I don't find these as tomb-like as the middle area ones, but nevertheless, they're interesting images I wanted to share. And this is more recent work by him. I wanted to share this person that nobody really knows about, I don't think. His name is Johannes Schreider. This is him. He's actually a stained glass artist, like for like German post-war, like when a lot of the churches and things were destroyed, they instead of doing like ecclesiastical windows, they hired artists to do the windows. And I think he's done really fascinating windows, which I'll share a couple here just so you can see like kind of what his real artwork looks like. But he made some collages that I'm really fascinated by, and there's a book of them. These are his drawings, which relate to the Agnes Martins I showed earlier. But he made these collages by burning and tearing paper. And they have this quality of architecture, but again, they feel like tombs to me, like mausoleums. They have this like weird hearth, fireplace, like claustrophobic. I don't know, for me, they really like slap. I don't know, they just feel like they're really like, they do something that you can't explain, but they feel like they're talking about the afterworld, or some sort of like transcendent place, although they're made by destroying material. Anyway, wanted to share those. Vincent Facteau shows with Matthew Marks, and maybe you've seen them before. He's totally fascinating artist. The early works have to do sometimes more with architecture directly and design, and maybe also like some play on material. But as he goes along, like I started to think of these as well as like a kind of exoskeleton for some sort of like post-industrial, I don't know, ballet of machines or something. Like, you know, when Chernobyl happened, they built a sarcophagus around Chernobyl. Like, I feel like these are sculptures that are defined by what is inside that we can't see. Maybe not this one, but these ones, as if he's built the sculpture around this kind of ballet of mechanism that we can't see. But these works, okay, so as you can see, like we're kind of like ramping up, like the forms are maybe a little bit less minimal, but at the same time, they're vibing loss, they're vibing like no place, possible like apocalypse, like are they the exoskeletons of machines or are they actually some sort of fantasy architecture? These sculptures also like just from every different angle, they're like a new piece, totally fascinating. And they have also this quality for me, like this post-apocalyptic sci-fi quality that I respond to, where it's like you're seeing like little burnt pieces of something, or it's like you feel like it may be like this one's covered in burlap, like you feel like there was an accident or something happened, or that it's past its zenith. It's like this weird area of loss or antimatter. Ruth Duckworth, amazing ceramicist. Maybe you guys saw there was a show of hers at Jeannie Greenberg like just recently. She's also dead, but she worked in this really interesting way for me, which is that she works, you'll see the works, a great picture. She works in this way that you think of the body, but you think of the bone, which I think is really unique. Like the works are really dry, like arid, not like dry as in they're humorless, but like they have this quality in which you're thinking about the body, but you think about the bone, which I think is strange because the body is a sack with water in it, but inside that sack of water, there are these bones that, for me, I don't know, it's weird. When you think about the bones, but you don't decide to think about death, it's strange. They're such a strange organ to have. And so I really like enjoy looking at these works and the way that they speak to softness, like mitosis or these other things, twinning, or all these things, but that they all have this like bony quality that they refer to Cycladic sculpture or something like very ancient, like early, like prehistory. And then my favorite ones are the ones where they have these like weird, like crowning, like there's like some sort of weird Giger baby that's gonna like shoot out or something like that. Like this one, where you feel like you're looking at a joint. It could be super erotic, but because it's ceramic and it has this bone-like quality, you feel like it's like arthritic or diseased or something, which is something that I really vibe on. Next up is this guy, Walter Pichler. You're gonna see he's like gonna go fully into the body, yet he remains in this kind of like funerary version of minimalism that I'm talking about. I collected all these books of his. They're kind of like proud, sorry. But as a book collector, it's kind of like I like to geek out on, that's why I include all the images of the books so that you can see like they're actually like from a thing. But this is a really fucking weird person. And I included all these pictures of him because I think he looks like a serial killer. Like I'm not really sure what his vibe is. And so he's Austrian, so he has this Germanic seriousness, but as you'll see, his practice is almost nearly impossible to explain. So on one hand, he's kind of, again, a fantasy architect. He's kind of interested in these weird utopian, you know, funerary kind of tomb-like buildings. But the way that he structured his practice to me is completely bonkers, okay? So he lives in the countryside of Austria. He's somehow connected to the art world, but he doesn't actually show his work in galleries or museums. He makes the work on his property, which is the series of buildings that he's designed. And then the sculptures, once they're made, they live in these buildings. So the works are shown in museums sometimes, but they're actually, to show them in the museum is to take them out of their context completely. So I can't really think of another artist that has ever worked this way. So he spent his whole life building this compound of buildings for which the sculptures would live in. And so the only way that I can really explain it is to show, I'll walk you through a project he made. But before I get there, I wanted to show that he also fits into this kind of Brancusi-ish, minimal, slightly biomorphic, but also very tied to architecture and geometry, made from sometimes a place of no place. If that's beginning to make sense for you. So these are all works that were made of steel that were on these huge, kind of telephone poles that were around his property. Okay, so he makes this project in '82 for the Venice Biennale. And this book is actually a really great one because it shows exactly what his process is. So he starts with this drawing. Oh shit, I forgot to mention, he's also religious, like Catholic, and to me, I make a delineation between religious and spirituality. Like there are tons of us that are spiritual, but maybe not religious, but this guy is actually religious. And I don't mean that in a pejorative, I just mean that it's kind of unique. I mean, okay, so a lot of artists had to paint religious scenes, but maybe they weren't themselves religious, but this guy is actually kind of spiritually connected to Catholicism. So it's kind of a unique situation. So this is a drawing of this project that he makes about this torso that's growing or growing around something that's growing. I don't know. I mean, it's a tree with roots on two sides and branches at the top. So it's not a normal tree. So I guess he finds some timbers that have the angle of branches that he's interested in. He wraps all this weird grass and kind of plants that are indigenous to his area around this thing. He covers it in mud. He lets the mud dry out and crack. He then fabricates this weird breastplate and penis plate and this other stuff, this helmet kind of thing. So they carry it in this weird mystical procession out of the workshop and take it to this building, which he's designed. So this is the building. And then once it's in the building, it's this way in which they're holding it. See it has this, oh, sorry, I'm pointing to the computer. You can see it has this weird tubes that they use to put the sticks through so that they can carry it, because it must weigh 1 billion pounds. And then they place that thing in this pedestal that he's made into the house. And then it goes next to this other thing that you can see. It's see these beautiful little mounds that it goes into the ground, and he's then fabricated all these other helmets. I mean, really weird stuff. So here's another project. He wants to create this kind of Jesus figure that hangs out in the loft space of this weird building he's created. So again, he uses this very bizarre production thing. And it's said that he's not really even comfortable talking to artists. He just likes to talk to other, I guess we'd call them now fabricators or whatever, but people who craftsmen, people who work with steel, or they work and he's more comfortable to talk to people about their vocations than his art. Nevertheless, he has this quality in which he machines all this crazy stuff and creates these weird figures. And then he dresses the figures and he puts them in the attic. And to me, this is truly singular work. I don't know. Has anybody seen anything like this before? No? Okay. Me neither. So I was really fascinated by it. It's not what I would make, but I think it's I think it shows the dedication to the vision is so singular that I really want to include him. And you can see how, okay, now he's we're going towards figuration. We're starting to think about real life things, but we're also still in a world of kind of minimalism. So this is his work. MoMA has some drawings of his, and he's represented by Barbara Gladstone, although he's dead. But his work is kind of hard to find. And he does all this other stuff that I just want to highlight quickly. This is the table saw in his workshop, but you can see the insert of the table saw he's welded all these weird tubes and things and glass. So like everything is like some weird eccentric project that's made from steel that feels cold and dangerous, and I don't know. And then to even get crazier, he does this. This is one of my favorite projects that he did that is truly eccentric. So this is a part of his workshop in which he wanted to make the water come off the roof and collect through these pipes so that it would run through the studio. I don't know. I just think it's amazing, and I really respect it. He did a plethora of other objects that I could go through, but you know, whatever. So we've now kind of crossed this threshold into some artists that I'm interested in that I would consider part of this euphoric transcendence. So like these are artists that definitely work more with recognizable imagery. They tend towards the figure. They often include, again, spirituality, mythology in these types. So first person I want to talk about, sorry, another Austrian, there's one more as well, but anyway, like it was not by, well, sometimes what happens with me, like I'll be researching, like I found out about Walter Pichler through this Bruno Gironcoli book. So often like there's a thread that's going, I'm like researching and studying, and one person goes into the next. So this is another incredibly singular and strange artist. He had a lot of pictures of himself in his book, so I included all those because I thought they were really kind of fascinating. He got kind of great looking as he got older. But he was a teacher at the school there in Vienna. And because Europe, the governments in Europe give more money for arts, like when you get hired to work for education, like you're making an incredible wage, and you're also getting an atelier that you can like work in, you know, and do your thing in. And so you're giving back to your students, and like, but you also have great material at your disposal. And so this guy worked incredibly. He has his own museum in Vienna, and I'm going to explain to you why. Because although he started out working very minimally, he progressed into these insane Baroque, grandiose fantasy machines that must weigh like 10,000 pounds. And so the majority of his work resides in Vienna at this museum that he created. And so these are absolutely gigantic works. And they kind of have this like odd subliminal commonness of decoration. Like he was actually interested in everyday objects. Like, so you can see like, this is how big they are, like they're. So this is the atelier before they built the museum. Like he would make the works and then display them and then take the parts apart and then store them in these like gigantic rooms that like none of us could ever afford because we don't live in Austria and whatever. But anyway, like you can see here, like there are things like croissants, like there are weird grapes. There are like, he works a lot with babies, which I think is weird. Sorry, I'm going backwards here. These are some of the early minimal works, which are fantastic too. But he definitely progresses into this. There's some drawings. There's some really strange. I think a lot of the Germanic people have this like Anselm Kiefer had this like incredible guilt over World War II, and it comes out in a kind of strange way in their artworks of the zeitgeist. But he starts to build all these big installations, and you can see that like sometimes he represents like wheat, or he'll represent something like overtly religious, like a Madonna or these things. But he's using like and getting inspiration from everyday objects, but because the works are sometimes so decorative, you kind of subliminally absorb it. So you're not really sure what you're looking at. You think you're looking at a motor, you may be looking at like some sort of heater or some sort of spaceship or something. I like, for the life of me, I can never really figure out like what it is, but to me it feels so right. And I really like vibrate with these works, and I feel like formally, even the way that they sit on these pedestals and they do all these weird things, it's like so singular. But you can see kind of what I'm trying to get at here is that sometimes the energy that artists are trying to muster becomes chaotic. It becomes disorganized. It becomes so maximal that it's like, it's buzzing with this kind of entropy, that it's like things are becoming, the molecules are bouncing off each other so much that it becomes like a white static. You know, as I show the next couple of artists, you'll see how it gets even crazier. But these works are totally fascinating. I actually learned about this artist through Vince Facteau, through writing back and forth with him, somebody that I really related to, and he did because of its kind of architectural quality. But he's one of the very few artists that I've ever seen that's able to use a baby. I mean, I collected a bunch of baby works here for you just to see, like, I think it's almost an impossibility. It's like they should have a class taught that's like, I dare you to use a baby, you know? But it's like these ones, like, I feel this, like, it's like really, it's painful though, somehow, as if like his childbirth was painful, or like that there's something so vulnerable about a fetus, or like, I don't know, it feels alien somehow too, like because of the way he's abstracted the body. And then when he's mixing it with these chickens, or like what, I don't, like, everything is so intense. Anyway, his name is Bruno Gironcoli. Grapes, like obsessed with grapes, croissants, babies, corkscrews, how if you wrote a list of what this work was about, it would sound really stupid. And I think some people think it is stupid. It's not for everyone, you know. I mean, it's like I told a friend of mine who was in Vienna, go to this museum, so like vicariously, I really want to go. And he went, and I don't know if anybody knows the designer Philippe Starck, but he was like, it's just like Philippe Starck. Like, I don't know, it's not for everybody, you know, but it's like I really like it. Anyway, enough Gironcoli, right? You can tell I really like him. A lot of images in there. Anyway, but I wanted to include this because, like, what still blows my mind about New York, I don't go and see enough shit. I'd rather work in the studio, so I don't go and see as much real stuff. But like, this piece was in Brooklyn at the Clearing, so like it happens. It's amazing, and I'm always punching myself for not going out there more. But I look at my books, and now I'm sharing them with you. So this guy is really weird. If anyone's a fan of Giger, H.R. Giger, the guy that designed Aliens, you know, he designed that. I like him a lot, and I guess he's too pop, and I didn't want to include him in this lecture because I thought it would be more interesting to add some esoteric people. But this guy has a really weird story, and to me, he's the proto Giger. Like, he's the original Giger. And so both these Giger and this artist, Ernst Fuchs, were obsessed with Hieronymus Bosch and Max Ernst and people like that. But this guy also religious. So his dad was an Orthodox Jew, but because of World War II, his dad fled to Shanghai, and the guy's mother converted him to Christianity so that he could like escape the prosecution. So his version of Christianity, though, is very like Old Testament. And so, as you can see, like the point I'm trying to make is like, this is getting like really insanely maximal. Like, it's a lot of kind of like masturbatory, like adding and layering. And also now like we're purely in figuration. And so this guy, I think this is great, right? Or not? But he, sorry? Ernst Fuchs, F-U-C-K, sorry, no, F-U-C-H-S. Shit, sorry, Ernst Fuchs. Anyway, I don't know. To me, like, this is an artist, like, I didn't know about this guy, and when I discovered him, I was like, is this terrible or is it awesome? And so for me, I also like fantasy art. Like, I like Frank Frazetta, and like, I like all high and low. But I feel like this guy is really dedicated, and he was like not popular. He was very interested in all the old masters' techniques. I mean, he was known for creating, you probably can't see it very well, but he developed this like weird, like crystalline, like texture. Like there's so many like weirdo things that he developed that like he had interests that I think the surrealists were kind of like too cool for. Like, he kind of like took it to a next level. And I think part of that was his like odd dedication to like sex, death, and religion, and all these things. They kind of like kept him like chugging along, making this work that is just weird. And I really love it. And I feel like it has this maximal quality that for me personally, I'm always like vibrating between a person on one shoulder that's saying like, no, let's reduce this, let's make it more minimal. And another person that's like, fuck that, let's go crazy. And like, let's make it like super maximal. And so like, I think like this guy was obsessed with unicorns and dragons and mandalas. And like, you know, it's like, it veers into some really weird areas, but he also has his own museum in Vienna, so that's really on my list to get there. But I think his technique is really cool, and I think it's like he really allowed himself to do special things with paint and to do special things with imagery and to take kind of this nightmarish and fantasy quality of surrealism to like a different level that like Ernst couldn't, or you know these other guys, like they couldn't go there. And I really respond to it. I hope you do too. So the last guy is a kind of diversion from this theory I've been trying to push on you guys about figuration, but it does link into my theory about entropy. And so my kind of concept here is that like certain parts of spirituality can be rarefied by reducing and becoming aesthetic, and then certain parts of spirituality are creative, maybe a better way to say like creative endeavors can be maximized by like heightening the disorganization and the entropy of the situation. So this guy, I've never seen one of these in person, but they are to me, like really viscerally disturbing sculptures. And let me explain why. All this dust and detritus that's on there he goes around and collects people's vacuum cleaner bags. And so this is like skin and hair and dust, and it's like, it's gotta be stinky. And just like, he also works with like blood and horsehair. And it feels to me like really apt, like for me as a person like you guys that's aging every day, like the more I'm around, the more I see that like the chaos and the churning of time, and how the trends are going faster and people are digesting shit faster, and that it's like your skin's falling off faster, and it's like everything, like this work makes me think of a lot of really terrible stuff, but I find it ultimately calming. And maybe you guys don't, but it's like, for me, like I don't see anybody making work like this, where it's like, some of these are like massive too. I think there's a couple of scale shots here, but some of them are like 10 feet tall and they're covered in dead skin and dust, and they feel like remnants of like machines and parts. So like if we contrast these with like events at Facto, it's like an Facto where like the paper mache makes everything smooth and orderly, and it gives you this kind of like tomb-like respect. Like this is a similar kind of tomb, but it's like after everything is ended. It's either at the bottom of the sea, or it's after some terrible war or some terrible miscalculation, human miscalculation. And sometimes, I don't know why, but I find it like comforting that it's like, this can also be a vision of creativity that's like real, that's not idealized, that doesn't sugarcoat things. Anyway, so this is a guy, his name, just to go back, because I forget sometimes, this is his name, Peter Bougain. I haven't really seen anything that he's made recently. This book is really, really great, and it's got some great interviews, but I find this work completely unlike mine or anyone else's, but I find it really fascinating. Anyway, so I just spend quickly, am I boring you guys? Or okay, all right. So I'm just gonna quickly now show you some of my work and just talk to you a tiny bit about what I do, just so you can see that like, as I'm talking about these other people, I'm also kind of talking about myself. So I'm a nerd. I work in this little space. I just sit on that little stool with my Dremels, and I make everything out of wood. I don't work with any assistants. I've been trying all these years to just keep it really low key. Like I'm scared to death that like the galleries will drop me, that I won't be able to sell things. No one will want to make an exhibition with me. I'm frustrated. And so I try to just keep it small, so that like if things do fail, that it's not the end of the world, you know, that I can like just keep going and doing my thing. Like I mentioned to you, I draw on these books. I draw all the time without really caring whether I make a successful drawing or not. But these drawings become sculptures. So like you'll see here, you look here, this was just a tiny, tiny little doodle, basically. And I looked at it a lot, and one day I decided I was going to make it. So I start to make it. And I just keep assembling it, and I take away certain materials, and I use a lot of texture. I find, like, for me, like as much as I preach to you guys about mark making and the meditative quality of mark making, there's also a meditative quality to removing material. The machine bumps up against the thing repeatedly, you know, and for me, I find this really calming. Like, I'm psyched on the day when I get up and I'm like, I'm going to texturize that whole part today, and that's all I'm going to do. And it's like, I listen to music and a lot of jazz, and I just kind of zone out. It's almost like I'm meditating all day. Thoughts are coming in, some good, some bad, you know. So anyway, so this is just one of those works that I'm showing you, and its progression in different stages. Certain things get sanded, texturized. A lot of times a piece like this originally was like one piece of wood minus the blocks that it's on. And I cut all the parts apart and reassemble them. And after I'm done making the whole thing, I then go back and do color. I'm a colorblind person. I've been working with my wife for over 20 years on color. I'm red-green colorblind, so I can see works. Like, those of you, if there's anyone here that I met with today, like, I can see I told you I can see your colors, but I don't see them the way that you see them. So, I think that's true of almost everything. So, and then the piece becomes this. And so that's kind of a typical way that I work. So I want to show you, like, a lot of times, like, I do try to pull back and just show and just like let things be just simple. 3 objects linked together by a pipe. Are they kidneys? Are they lungs? Are they the body? Are they not? Are they people? Are they spaceships? Are they repositories? Are they tombs? Are they imperishables? Do they relate to spirituality or not? Are they sexual or not? Do they have to do with disease or not? Are they architecture or not? And then sometimes I push and I make things complicated, you know, I put everything together so that we're making connections, so that we see that, like, this feeling of like, like, happens everywhere, and that, like, there's a kind of like molten quality in the way that which the unconscious creates imagery that everyone sees different. But ultimately, I feel like really the point of this work is all about its details. It's all about its kind of tactile quality. It's about the enjoyment of, like, for a texture like the one in the back, like this texture here, like each one of those is circled with a tool that removes material. So it's like, if there are, like, you know, 4,000 like warts on this thing, it's like it took 4,000 like, you know, removings of material. Like, these are the kinds of things that I think are interesting in the work. And then also, like, all the little details, like I talked to you about Vienna Werkstatt, and it's like, maybe you don't care about design, you don't have to, but it's like, I like design, and I find like sometimes one frustrating thing about art is that it doesn't have a use. So I try to make things that have funny uses, like these are earplug stands. And sex and eroticism is like a really big part of my work. In my earliest work, like, it was very overt, and as I got older, it became more like disguised. Architecture, science, these kinds of things are what's really important to me. The body, the process of the body, the way the body degrades, these things are really important to me. And fantasy, sci-fi, science, you know, these technology, like, these are all things that are kind of important to me. And then I think, like, you know, because I'm colorblind, like, a lot of times the palettes are really bright, and I found this useful, that because I feel like the content is a little bit dark, I find it useful to misdirect you, the viewer, by creating really bright palettes and trying to trick you into thinking that what we're looking at here is joy, when actually we may be looking at, like, a crazy protest or a war or, you know, cancer or something like this. And then I would say, like, above and beyond just making discrete works, like, one of my favorite things to do is to kind of collect works and to try to, like, build on the idea that one work relates to another, that relates to another, that kind of then implies, like, an overall concept. And so I think because so much of my work comes from the unconscious, I do like to try to give it some sort of structure to at least encourage people who may not want to look at a nonlinear thinking, that there may be some way to think about it linearly. And so that is what I do. I'm happy. Do we do a Q&A or what do we do? No, because I'm done. Okay, so like I'm happy to answer any questions or go back to anything in the lecture you want to hear about, but that's what I have to say. Any questions? No? Yes?
I'm curious if you have any like literary inspirational people to some of what's.
Yeah, I mean, I love reading, I mean, for sure. I mean, early on for me, like the Nouveau Roman writers, because they're so descriptive, like Alain Robbe or somebody like this, that's like where they're trying to take like the novel and they're trying to say like, okay, we're going to take all this shit out of it, like no time period, no, you know, like no, like they take all this metaphor out and it's like you're reading like pure description. I really enjoyed the description. I mean, I read everything. I just read a really nasty Elvis biography written by this guy that hated Elvis. And I really recommend it because Elvis had all these weird paraphilias, like sexual, like no kink shaming. I'm just saying like he had some really wild stuff that he was into that I think is interesting. I mean, I read like that. I do read a lot of science stuff. Like I really love to read about science. Like there are a lot of scientists that work the way artists do. Like some scientists, for example, that study nature, like originally our original interaction with nature through shamanism was not anthropocentric. And so like I don't think of my work as being made for people or by people. Like I think like it may be understood by the species that I conjured in the making, if that, I know that sounds crazy, but it's like, but science, some scientists also work that way. Like, so in order to understand the tick, like some scientists like try to think or be as a tick. So like a tick can live for 18 years without food. And so like, what is time to a tick? Like, so you, in order to understand a tick, you need to be a tick, and that's what shamans did. And so like, I like to study science too. I think about science a lot. I mean, I just read a whole bunch of what's her name, like theory, like Olivia Light. She wrote that book, Everybody, that just came out recently. It's like art criticism kind of stuff. Like I read that, like, and also like I read a lot of like really low stuff, like stupid stuff on the internet, like celebrity gossip and like dumb stuff. Like I feel addicted to information, and you don't really know what information is gonna hit, you know, like when what you need. And so I kind of like spread it all out, and I read all sorts of different stuff, but it all just depends. Like I'm trying to think like what else recently I read. I just read, my friend Justin just wrote a book about Yamasaki, the guy that did the World Trade Centers. And so it was all about architecture and, you know, Yamasaki and how he was like kind of like an outlier, a kind of spurned architect, and like it was about his biography. I'll read it. But I mean, I do, one thing that's weird when you do a lecture is that you find that actually your interests, you think they're really like spread out, but you actually just have like one thing, you know. It's like, I didn't want to give a lecture that included like 20 Austrians, but like, do you know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of embarrassing, but it's like, what are you going to do? If that's what, that's your kink, then like, you know what I mean? What are you going to do? It sucks, but.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask if you knew of the poems of Georg Trakl.
I don't.
He was an Austrian poet working in Vienna at the same time.
Same time period?
But
somebody that you jam on, or like?
Yeah, his poems are totally anachronistic. So he talks about monks and
oh, cool.
ghosts.
There was something going on there. I mean, it was like, it's a real, like, it's really fascinating. It may not be everybody's thing, but it's like some places are just that it's like the gravity is right, or I don't know, it's just weird. Like, lots of cool stuff going on there at that time period. And I guess all over Europe, but specifically there for me, for my tastes, you know. Anybody else?
When you're going to start object points, like the scale of it, like
Good question. Good question. I use a projector. So like I'm very like, as I try to describe, like I'm very married to the drawing, because I feel like the drawing does something that you would never do as practically for a maker. Like when you make a sculpture, a practical part about it that you don't have in painting, really, you know, like, and so it has to like last or stand up or whatever. And so it's a different mindset for me, and I don't really want to mix the two. And so what I do is I edit all the drawings, and then when I decide which one I'm going to make, I project it and I look at it, and I just know what size is right. I mean, also certain projects like the space, like I guess certain things could be site specific. I never thought of it that way, but it's like, I guess like I do like keep all that in my mind, but I have a very organic process, and it's kind of like it's like I kind of like I show you all those books that I draw in, but it's like time like kind of erodes the ones that don't matter, and because I see the ones that I still like, and it's like, oh, I like that one. I don't know if it's familiarity or just like the vibration, the zeitgeist or whatever, but that's how I do it. I just project it and then I just build it.
And I really appreciate all the references. And I'm curious, like, because you showed so many drawings.
Yeah.
If you ever consider your drawings as like finishing work, or if you ever like make paintings out of them, or you want to
Yeah. I mean, I always wanted works on paper to be a thing, but it's like nobody. This is a commercial thing, so it's kind of a shitty way to talk about it. But it's like nobody wants them. And so I do make charcoals, and I think they're bigger and they last longer, like to make. So it's like the decision making is more like to make a painting where you have an area in which time passes and you're adding or subtracting, because you can erase charcoal and like stuff. You can't erase a sculpture, you know what I mean? And so I really enjoy charcoal, and like I really like enjoy making it, but the logic of what people want or what people like, I don't want to show them together. That's one thing I'm for sure of. Like it doesn't help to have a drawing and then the thing. It just, for me personally, I don't like it. And so I don't do it that way, but no one's ever asking me like, hey, let's make a drawing show. Like, you know, it's like, it just is not happening. And I feel like if it hasn't happened after 20 years of being in New York, I don't know if it's going to happen, you know?
But in a way, you would.
I would absolutely do it. I've had one drawing show at Andrea Risen when she was the gallery, and I think it looked nice and it did okay. But I don't think people really think of me as like a drawing person. So it's like I don't know why I don't know. It's weird. I can't explain it. I kind of feel like though that it's like it's okay with me because it's like I'm married to drawing. And like that's my relationship, and I don't need it like I also don't need people to purchase or show my sculptures for them to be fulfilling for me, but I know for sure like drawing is not anything anyone can ever take away from me. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I was paralyzed and could only use my mouth, I would still make drawings. Like, you know, like it's there, like it's basically free to make a drawing, all things considered. And so for me, it's like it's the most valuable of all the arts, because it's like it's so low risk, yet what you can discover is such a high reward. It's like, why wouldn't you make drawings? Like I was talking to somebody today, one of the sculptor, and doesn't make drawings, just totally fucking fine, who cares? But it's like, but it's kind of rad to make drawings, because you can do whatever you want. You don't have to ever show it to anybody. You can throw it away, like it doesn't hurt. I don't know, I love drawing. I really believe in it, and I didn't always. And so once I realized that it was important, I made sure to do it a lot. And to try to change it up, draw bigger, smaller, pen, pencil, watercolor, gouache, like all of it. You just try to invent a new language, because it takes time and practice. Unless you want to repeat all the time, which I fear, even though I lean on repetition, I fear it too. I don't want to get stuck. So the drawing helps me to not get stuck.
In the beginning, you showed pictures of the house, and then you said that they follow other community who used to live there. They follow the
The Shakers, yeah.
Like verbs, prior.
That what?
Verbs, prior.
Prayer, yeah.
Prayer.
Yeah, so I sometimes I get nervous when I'm doing this thing, and I go too fast because I know I have so many images to show, so I forget to say certain things. But like the Shakers, like they made textiles, they made all this crazy stuff, music. I mean, they created a whole entire world. But one of the things that they really believed in was like activity, to be busy. to be doing something, you know? And so like for that reason, like everyone kind of made stuff. So they made brooms, ladles, flatware, like stoves, architecture, like, you know, chairs, like candles, candlesticks, like everything they needed. Like they kind of wanted the utopia of like, if we want it, let's just build it ourselves and like, and make it for ourselves. I really like that. And the concept for me of, I take work as prayer as like a different kind of thing. Like for me, like I feel useful and useful then in turn to other people if I'm fulfilled by working. And so that's not true for, you know, for everybody. Like not everybody, that's not what people have to, I'm not saying everybody should do that. I'm just saying I've related to the concept and I never thought about it. When I was in grad school, there was no way I could talk about my textures and my craft, which just wasn't allowed. It wasn't acceptable. No one would listen. No one, that was not how, you weren't allowed to talk like that. And so for me, it was like after I got out of school and came to New York and worked for like 8 years, like I was like, oh, wait, like I actually enjoy craft and I enjoy work. And it's like, I think some people also respond to it as a viewer, like you feel that time passed or whatever. And so I didn't realize that could be content. And so when I saw like Shakers was something for me that I saw that I was like, oh, wow, like I liked the Shakers before, but I didn't know this was the concept. But yeah, that's what I see.
You ever worked with patterns here?